When Joseph Duggar entered his written plea in late March 2026, he did two things at once. He said not guilty, and he requested a jury trial. In a case where he already admitted what he did, twice, on a recorded phone call, to a detective. He wants 12 strangers to decide his fate. Now that is his constitutional right. Nobody is taking that away from him. But as a legal strategy, it is one of the most consequential decisions of his entire life. And most of the coverage has completely missed why this matters, what it signals, and what it could cost everyone involved, including a 14-year-old girl who never asked to be in the middle of any of this. So let's break it down. Because the jury trial request is not just a procedural checkbox. It is a window into the defense team's thinking. And what that window reveals is either a bold strategy or a catastrophic miscalculation. Here is what most people don't know about how criminal trials actually work. In the American justice system, a defendant has a choice. You can go before a judge alone, that's a bench trial, where one person evaluates the evidence and delivers a verdict. Or you can go before a jury of 12 ordinary citizens who have to reach a unanimous decision. And the choice between those two paths tells you everything about where the defense team's head is. Most experienced criminal defense attorneys, when the evidence against their client is strong, will push hard toward a plea deal. Not because they're giving up, but because a plea deal contains the damage. It limits what a jury hears. It limits how long the sentence runs. It limits the public spectacle. But Joseph's team went the other way. They requested a jury. And the question everyone paying attention should be asking is, why? There are really only two explanations. Either the defense genuinely believes they can win, that they can discredit the evidence, challenge the admissions, and create enough reasonable doubt to walk their client out of that courtroom. Or this is a procedural move, a delay tactic, a way to buy time while plea negotiations happen quietly behind the scenes and the jury request gets withdrawn the moment a deal is struck. Both of those possibilities tell us something, and neither of them is particularly reassuring for Joseph Duggar. Now let's talk about what a jury in Bay County, Florida would actually hear, because this is where the legal strategy starts to look less like a plan and more like a gamble. Picture being a juror. You walk into a Florida courtroom in 2026. You don't know the Duggar name. You don't know the TV show. You've never heard of 19 Kids and Counting. You are just a person, summoned for jury duty, asked to evaluate evidence. The prosecution starts presenting their case. And here is what they put in front of you. First, a young woman, now 14 years old, takes the stand and tells a Florida courtroom what happened to her when she was 9. On a family vacation in Panama City Beach, the details are not vague. The details are not unclear. They are specific, they are credible, and they are delivered by a real human being sitting in a witness chair, looking at a jury. Then the prosecution plays a forensic interview recording. A trained professional walks through the account in a structured, legally validated process designed specifically to hold up in court. This is not hearsay. This is documented, methodical, admissible evidence. Then, and this is the part that should terrify Joseph Duggar's legal team, they play the audio. The recorded phone call. The one where Joseph Duggar, speaking to the victim's father while a detective monitors the line, admits that it happened. Uses the phrase that his intentions were not pure, acknowledges what he did, not once, twice, on 2 separate recorded calls, in his own voice, with his own words. Then the prosecution potentially plays jailhouse calls with conversations Joseph made while in custody, where at no point does he say he didn't do it. And depending on what the judge allows, the prosecution may reference the broader family context. A brother, Josh Duggar, convicted of possessing details about how the family home was managed, the kind of picture that paints a pattern, not an accident. That is what 12 people in a Florida courtroom would hear. That is the case the prosecution is walking in with. And Joseph Duggar's team looked at all of that and said, yes, let's put him in front of a jury. Now here is the counter-argument, and it is not completely crazy. Bay County, Florida is in the Florida Panhandle. It is deeply conservative. Evangelical Christianity has significant roots in that region, and the Duggar family for a long time had a genuine, loyal, sympathetic audience in exactly those communities. families who watch the show, families who share their values, families who believe in confession, in repentance, in forgiveness. A defense attorney doing the math might think about it this way. You don't need to win the whole jury. You need one person, one juror out of 12 who, even after hearing everything, sees a man who admitted his sin, who asked for forgiveness, who showed remorse, and decides they cannot vote to send him to prison. One person who hangs the jury. Mistrial. The case has to start over. And suddenly, the prosecution has to decide whether to retry it or offer a better deal. That is a legitimate strategy. It has been used before. It has worked before. But it requires something very specific. A jury that never fully hears the strength of the evidence. Or a jury where the sympathy factor overrides the evidence entirely. And in this case, with audio recordings, forensic interviews, and a credible eyewitness betting on one sympathetic juror is not a plan. It is a prayer. And here's the part that the family may not have fully thought through yet. In a jury trial, everything admitted into evidence becomes part of the public record. That audio recording of Joseph admitting what he did, the one that currently exists only in court documents and legal filings, gets played in an open Florida courtroom. It gets recorded by every journalist in attendance. It gets transcribed. It gets clipped. It gets uploaded. It goes global within hours. The Duggar name, which has already been associated with one of the most disturbing criminal cases in recent reality television history after Josh's conviction, would face a second, separate, possibly even more damaging public reckoning. The victim's testimony would be the most covered moment in Duggar family history. More than the premiere of the show. More than Josh's sentencing. More than anything Jim, Bob, and Michelle ever put on television. A jury trial in this case is not a contained legal event that happens in a courtroom and stays there. It is a public reckoning that would be broadcast, live-streamed, dissected, and discussed internationally. Every podcast, every T-channel, every true crime platform would be covering it in real time. The question is whether the family, and particularly Jim Bob Duggar, who has historically positioned himself as the patriarch controlling every major family decision, is prepared to watch that happen, or whether a plea deal materializes before that courtroom moment ever arrives. Now let's talk about the numbers, because the mandatory minimum math in this case is brutal, and whoever is advising Joseph Duggar needs to be very direct about what the stakes are. Under Florida law, lewd and lascivious molestation of a child under the age of 12 is a life felony. Under the Jessica Lunsford Act, conviction carries a mandatory minimum of 25 years in prison, no parole, lifetime sex offender registration, 20 years of supervised release following incarceration. Joseph Duggar is 31 years old. A conviction at trial means he is in a Florida state prison until he is at least 56 years old, and quite possibly significantly longer if the judge sentences beyond the mandatory minimum, which judges have broad discretion to do. He has 4 children. They would be in their 30s by the time their father was released at the earliest possible scenario. His marriage, his relationships, everything he has built, all of it on the other side of a 25-year wall. At minimum. A plea deal could potentially reduce the charge, could potentially negotiate a shorter sentence, could potentially spare the victim from having to testify. But a plea deal requires standing up in open court and saying the word guilty, permanently, on the record, forever. And so the jury trial request starts to look like something else entirely. Not just legal strategy, not just a procedural move. It looks like a refusal. A refusal to say that word. A gamble against 2 recorded admissions, a forensic interview, and a victim who has already made clear she is not hiding that maybe, somehow, this jury will be the one that sees it differently. Those are the odds. And someone in that defense team has to explain them clearly to Joseph Duggar and to his father. The question is whether those explanations are being absorbed, or whether the family's pattern of minimizing and managing is still running the show. Because here's what the family should already know. They have lived this before. Josh Duggar went to trial. His attorney, Travis Story, the same attorney who now represents Joseph in Arkansas matters, argued Josh's innocence through an entire federal criminal proceeding. The jury deliberated. They came back guilty. on all counts. Josh Duggar was sentenced to 12 years and 7 months in federal prison. He is there right now. The family watched one son go to trial with experienced attorneys, with resources, with a loyal base of supporters, with every legal advantage money and connections could provide. And they watched him lose, completely. The jury heard the evidence and delivered a verdict that was not close. Travis' story is now connected to Joseph's case in some capacity. The Florida attorney, Albert Saline, is handling the state-level proceedings in Bay County. And the defense team is making the same fundamental calculation that Josh's team made. Maybe this jury will be different. Maybe this evidence won't land the same way. Maybe the sympathy factor changes the outcome. Josh's trial should have been a lesson. When the evidence is overwhelming, juries follow the evidence. The family has now watched that happen once. The question is whether they believe Joseph's case is genuinely different, or whether they have convinced themselves that it is because it is easier than confronting the alternative. There is a date on the calendar that everyone paying attention needs to know: May 18th, 2026. That is Joseph Duggar's next scheduled Florida court appearance before Circuit Judge Brantley Scott Clark Jr. in Bay County. At that hearing, the court will likely address the discovery schedule, meaning how evidence gets shared between prosecution and defense. It will likely address any preliminary motions, and it will set the overall timeline for where this case is heading. But here is what makes that date more than just a procedural stop. If plea negotiations have been happening in the background, and in complex cases like this, they almost always are, even when both sides are publicly posturing, the May 18th hearing is the first public signal of which direction this is really heading. Pay attention to the motions filed before that date. If the defense files aggressive pretrial motions to suppress the recorded admissions, arguing they were obtained improperly, that Joseph didn't understand his rights, that the calls can't be used, that is a signal. It means they intend to fight this in open court. They are building toward trial. If the defense instead requests continuances, delays the timeline, and shows any indication of interest in negotiating, that is a completely different signal. It means a plea is being actively considered. It means someone on that team is doing the math and deciding the gamble isn't worth it. Every word from that courtroom on May 18th will be read as a strategic signal by legal analysts, by journalists, and by everyone who has been watching this case. Because the direction this case takes in the next few weeks determines whether this stays a court story or becomes the next defining Duggar media moment. And before we go any further into strategy and signals and legal math, we need to stop for a moment and talk about the human cost of what is being decided here. There is a 14-year-old girl in the middle of this case. She was 9 years old when what is alleged to have happened. She has already given a forensic interview. She has already watched the aftermath of her disclosure ripple through her family and through the Duggar family. She has already lived through the part where the adults around her had to make decisions about what to do with the truth she told. A jury trial means something very specific for her. It means preparing to testify in court. It means sitting in a Florida courtroom and delivering testimony about what happened to her as a child. It means being cross-examined by a defense attorney whose literal job is to challenge her account, poke holes in her memory, create doubt about her credibility. And it means doing all of that while Joseph Duggar sits 10 feet away from her. Her family has spoken about her strength. They've said she is not scared. They have said they stand behind her completely. And that means everything the kind of support system a child needs in a moment like this is not nothing. It matters enormously. But the courage required to sit in a criminal courtroom and testify about childhood sexual trauma under cross-examination in a case with national media attention against a defendant from a famous family is an extraordinary thing to ask of anyone, let alone a teenager. Let alone a teenager who never chose to be in this story. The decision Joseph's legal team made for a jury trial is not just a legal maneuver. It is a decision about what they are willing to put this child through in pursuit of a not guilty verdict. And that is worth saying out loud, clearly, without softening it. Because in all the coverage about strategies and hearings and plea negotiations, that part of the story sometimes gets lost. So here is where everything stands. Joseph Duggar requested a jury trial. He admitted to the offense on a recorded call twice in his own voice. He is facing a mandatory minimum of 25 years under Florida state law if convicted. He is represented by attorneys who are navigating one of the strongest evidentiary cases against any defendant in this family's legal history. A May 18th hearing is approaching that will tell us whether this is moving toward a fight or toward a deal. And somewhere in Bay County, Florida, a 14-year-old girl is waiting to find out if she has to walk into a courtroom and tell 12 strangers what happened to her when she was 9. The jury trial request is a strategy, but it is also a statement. It says, "We are not ready to stand up in open court and say the word guilty. We are not ready to let this end quietly. We are going to put this child through a trial. We are going to make her testify. And we are going to bet everything on the possibility that one person on that jury will choose mercy over evidence." That is the gamble on the table. Not just Joseph Duggar's future, not just the family's name, not just Jim Bob's legacy or the network's archives or the fan base that still defends them. Her future, her healing, her ability to move through this and get to the other side. 12 people in a Florida courtroom, 2 recorded admissions, 1 forensic interview. 1 victim said she is not scared, and 1 defendant who looked at all of that and said, "Let's go to trial." Whether that decision holds, whether it stays a jury trial or collapses into a plea before May 18th even arrives, will tell us everything about what the Duggar family has actually learned from watching Josh's case play out. From watching a jury deliver a guilty verdict, from watching 12 strangers look at overwhelming evidence and decide that sympathy is not the same thing as innocence. The coverage is going to continue. The hearings are going to happen. And at some point in 2026, this case is going to reach its conclusion one way or another. When it does, the verdict will say something not just about Joseph Duggar's guilt or innocence in the eyes of the law. It will say something about what the system does for victims who are brave enough to tell the truth, and what it does to families who have spent years convincing themselves that managing a story is the same thing as resolving one. That is the case. That is the strategy. That is what is being gambled with. And now you know exactly how high the stakes are.